Hi there. Today we're going to be talking about problems that can arise during the transaction. So this is a Murphy's Law conversation, and every agent who calls me with an issue, especially a weird issue, the running joke is they say, "I'm your problem child. I always have some sort of situation." Well, I would love to tell you that you're the only one that has weird situations during the transaction, but Donna and Jennifer can attest to the fact that I answer calls all day, every day with weird stuff. So we're going to talk about some of that weird stuff today. One thing that can come up is title clouds or title issues. So once the home has gone under contract and the title work has begun on the buyer's side of the transaction, oftentimes they will find an unsatisfied lien. They will find a chain of ownership flaw, and these become what's called title clouds. The seller is supposed to be conveying clear title to the buyer. So these title clouds have to be cleaned up prior to settlement. Now, the first question that an agent wants to ask me when a title cloud or a title defect has been discovered is this the end of the transaction? And I'll point you to our standard provisions page of our purchase agreement, which is the last page of the actual purchase agreement. The standard provisions page is where it goes into detail on all sorts of things. What is the definition of a closing cost? When does a business day begin counting? It just essentially is a clarification page. It also talks about prorations, including propane gas in the propane tank. So one of the items on there is title, and it indicates that the seller must convey clear title to the buyer at closing. However, if a title defect or a title cloud is discovered, that standard provisions page goes ahead and says that the seller will be granted 30 days from discovery, and that is calendar days, 30 calendar days from discovery of the title defect or the title cloud to remedy the title issue. And the buyer has no termination rights in relation to this discovery of a title defect or a title cloud, because they are already agreeing when they sign the purchase agreement that they will give the seller 30 days from discovery in order to correct the problem. So one thing that is always important, and y'all, if I beat one drum, it is this one: put everything in writing. So if you are the buyer's agent and a title cloud has been discovered, yes, call the listing agent and say, "Oops, we've hit a little snag. This is the situation. Apparently, they never received the death certificate for your client's wife or husband or whoever, other owner of the property, from 5 years ago or 6 years ago. Can you guys please get a copy of the death certificate over to the settlement company so that that can be rectified at the municipality to indicate that now there is only one owner to that property?" Now, that's a very common title issue that may come up. It's just essentially housekeeping that needs to be done whenever one of the owners of the home have passed away. So why I'm emphasizing to put it in writing is, yes, call the listing agent when you're the buyer's agent and this has been discovered. Call them and let them know that this has been discovered and get them working on it, but then follow up with an email, because what you're doing is you are marking the date of discovery. So if issues come up 2 weeks later, you're already 2 weeks into the 30 days. If your buyer wants to preserve that termination right, then you want to get that clock started as the buyer's agent, okay? And I don't know that a phone call to the listing agent will constitute discovery. So you and the other agent may argue later as to what day was discovery. Now, you don't need to be, Matlock and be like, documenting discovery of title cloud, just put it in the email. "Hey, following up from our phone call we had a few moments ago, thank you for getting work on finding a death certificate for Mr. Jones. I'm sorry this title issue has come up, and I'm happy to have you on my team to work through this." Okay. You are documenting that discovery was made on that day, but you're not hitting them over the head with it and acting threateningly that 30 days starts clocking now. Okay. So you want to mark it, through email so that you can go back to that email later and prove discovery. Now, title clouds are very common. One of my very first transactions ever was for a little old lady who had lived in that house like 45 years. Actually, she lived across the street from Donna's parents at the time. And I helped her sell her house. And she had satisfied the mortgage in like 1978 or something. It had never been noted at the courthouse. So we had to find her paper mortgage deed satisfaction documents. And I had to literally, because she was in a nursing home by this time, her daughter and I had to go to her house. And I was, it was terrible, but she was in a nursing home and really didn't want her house sold. But obviously that is what needed to happen to pay for her care. So even though she was alive and well in a nursing home, I was joking because I got injured like 4 times in that house, minor injuries, like 4 times in that house, trying to find this deed with the satisfaction marked on it. And we found it in a trunk, but that trunk snapped shut on my hand. And I kept thinking, this lady, she is PO'd that we are selling her house. But eventually at the bottom of this trunk, we found from the 70s, something where her mortgage company had sent her documentation and they had stamped it satisfied. So we had to take that to the settlement company so they could make the municipality updated and update the deed card at the municipality. So that was one where I thought, oh, is this how real estate is? Is this what I'll be doing every time? I've not had that kind of situation again, but you will run into some weird stuff. And you understand then why there's going to be a 30-day extension to the contract. Now, nobody likes the 30-day extension. And if you are the listing agent, I would urge you to work quickly to remedy a title cloud. Just because we can push that moving date, and just because the buyer doesn't have a termination right, doesn't mean working quickly on a problem isn't the best idea. Absolutely try to work on urgent matters urgently. Now, I'm going to keep moving. If you have a question about title clouds, we're going to move into encroachments now. But I will, of course, throw your hand up or unmute yourself if you have any questions about title clouds. So moving on to encroachments. Encroachments are where one property owner is encroaching on the neighboring or adjacent parcel. This can happen very frequently with driveways and fences. And unless a buyer is having a survey done, they may not even know an encroachment exists. Now, sometimes an encroachment has been recorded on a previous survey that you don't even know about until the title work is being done. So the buyer's already under contract and the buyer has opted not to have a survey, but during the course of the title work, the title company discovers an old survey that's recorded at the courthouse, and it may already indicate an encroachment that exists. This would not come up necessarily as a title cloud because, first of all, the seller is not required to disclose encroachments. Now, if the listing agent knows of an encroachment, they should tell the buyer's agent about it prior to writing a contract. But quite frankly, I don't ask about encroachments. Or if I ask about encroachments and the seller says, not to my knowledge, that is good enough for me. Because as a listing agent, my duty is not discovery. My job is not to get my magnifying glass and go all over that property and find everything that could possibly be a material defect. It's if I knew about it or should know about it. Now, if I'm working an open house at that listing and the next door neighbor marches over and says, I want you to know that this driveway is 2 feet on my property. Well, I may not have had an obligation to discover if that's true or not prior to that conversation, but I might feel like I do now. And I like to get in front of problems and resolve them quickly before I have to resolve them later with a lot of stress with more parties. So in that instance, I likely would go ahead and talk to the seller about it. I might go ahead and talk to the courthouse and see if they have any past surveys on file. And I may ask more information from that next door neighbor. Now, maybe that next door neighbor is just disgruntled and is not telling the truth. I don't know. But I'm probably going to have more conversation and say, okay, please let me know how you know that. And he may say, well, I bought the property 5 years ago and we had a survey and I've been arguing with this seller for 5 years since to move their driveway off of my property. So that does come up, retaining walls, all sorts of things. So if you end up becoming aware of an encroachment, just call me and I'm going to give you some advice and walk you through it and help you through that. Encroachments, I will tell you, the oddest one we had is a team at our office last year. There was literally a retaining wall made of tires and it was on the neighbor's property. Now it was on the back of the property. So we really didn't discover it until well into the process, but that tire wall became quite the issue. So, what happened is the buyers then decided, no, don't push this off on us at closing. You know, you need to deal with this Mr. and Mrs. Seller now, not after closing or at closing, or make it our problem. So encroachments definitely come up and fairly often. So just know what they are and know that you can call us and we'll walk you through it. Now, we're going to move on to easements. Similar, but not the same. So easements are another way you can have, it's not an encroachment. An easement is use of a neighboring property or any property that has been granted to you either legally or because you've been using it for a long time. So I'll give you an example. Mine and Donna's grandmother's house, because you know Donna's my first cousin. So Donna and my grandmother's house, that was mine and my husband's first house. We purchased it from the family. And it was set so far back off the road that the only way to get to it without being landlocked was to drive across an easement across the back end of about 6 properties. So we have a gravel road that travels the last, 8 feet of the neighboring cul-de-sacs back property lines. That is an easement. I don't own that property. All of those neighbors own that property, yet I have a deeded right now because we've been using it for 50 years or well, more than 50 years, since it's been in use and never been abandoned for all that time. This is an easement that exists. Now, all parties are supposed to maintain the road. We're the only ones who use the road, so we maintain the road. And they're not allowed to put up fences or structures or block the path in any way. And in fact, a neighbor at one point, we're the only ones who use the road. So a neighbor at one point parked a really huge moving truck that she had purchased down there on the road, right behind her fence, but it really restricted us getting around it. And we bumped into poles and, we tried to work our way around it for a long time, trying to be good neighbors. But eventually we had to talk to her about how, truthfully, we're not trying to be mean, but we can't use the road with a giant moving truck parked on the side of it. So she wasn't thrilled, but we managed to help her get it into her fence line so that she could keep it there. So an easement can go away. And the way it can go away is if one owner purchases all of the parcels. So let's say my husband and I become real estate moguls, okay? And we buy all 6 houses in that cul-de-sac and we own all of them. So that easement would cease to exist because I would now own all of the property. And I may want to be careful with that because if I ever choose to sell all of those homes again, I may have to reestablish the easement. Easements also can be for things like HVAC units, propane tanks, fences. And what can happen is when there's a large parcel and let's say the mom and dad own a large tract of land and they decide to start parceling off parts for their various children, okay? Maybe there's a fence or a barn or something that ends up straddling the new parcel lines. So an easement or a road, say, going through there. The easement didn't exist until you decided to parcel off those parcels. So now you've created an easement situation. Now encroachments can happen that way too. If the barn is straddling the parcel line now, that's going to be an encroachment to whoever owns the barn. So it's going to be important whenever you represent clients with land or maybe a house that has an additional lot. You're going to want to talk to them about if they're wanting to sell off that lot, are we creating an encroachment or are we creating some sort of easement? And you can't landlock properties. So if it's a 5-acre farm and they decide to parcel off 1 acre in the back and build a dream home and then sell off the other parcels, they're going to want to make sure they've created an easement back to that back acre, because you can't landlock a property. We can't tell people, well, guess you got to buy a helicopter to get to your property. Okay. So easements can be recorded or not recorded. The easement we use for our house is not recorded. It's just been in constant use daily for, 80 years or something. So easements can be recorded though. Now, easements cannot be abandoned without the agreement of everyone. Okay. So if I went up and down the street and at my property and got permission from 5 of the 6 owners to allow me to purchase that little bit of land that is our easement, but the 6th person said no dice, everybody's got to agree. That is the same for deed restrictions. Deed restrictions are not necessarily a problem that arises during a transaction, but if there are deed restrictions in place for 8 parcels and 7 of the 8 people say, let's get rid of this deed restriction that says you can only have 2 dogs, but the last person says, no, I'm not getting rid of that deed restriction, then it's 2 dogs maximum. So deed restrictions also cannot be lifted unless all parcel owners agree to lift the deed restrictions. Okay, that's easements. Let's talk about shared wells. They not good. Lenders hate them. So there are problems with shared wells that you can imagine, like what happens when the well breaks? What happens when somebody uses too much of the well water? What happens when one of them puts in a swimming pool and decides to use the well water to fill the swimming pool? What are going to be the issues with sharing a well? And they are common. So again, you're going to have a property on 5 acres and then they parcel off an acre and sell it, and somebody builds a little house there, and then later it's sold and they're sharing a well. Lenders don't like it for obvious reasons. They don't want to buy or make a mortgage and then try to sell a mortgage that has a shared well. It is not going to sell on the secondary market very well. So it's not going to be able to be neatly packaged with other like kind mortgages and sold in the secondary market. So shared wells will pop up to be an issue. So if there is a well, you're going to, as a buyer's agent, you're going to want to ask the listing agent if it's a shared well or not. Okay. Jennifer, do you have any experience with shared wells or anything to add to that?
I do. I've had one property that closed, and it was actually, I believe it was a USDA loan. I was pretty nervous about it, but it did go through okay. The biggest thing for the shared well for me was that we did have to find, as far as the appraisal was concerned, they had to find a property that had a shared well so that it was a like property. So that could be a little bit complicated as they're phasing out. There's not a lot of them out there now. For them, it wasn't an issue. It was a rural property. There was only 2 houses on the well. The well was actually on the property that my folks were buying. So I think that made it a little bit easier. I don't know if it would have been more of an issue if the well was on another piece of land. I don't have experience there, but it did work out for my folks and they've not had any issues. I could definitely see where there could be issues because, I don't know that they had in writing who handled the maintenance, because let's see, there's a well pump, there's things that could happen. So if something went out, who's responsible for taking care of that? I mean, you would think that that stuff needed to be in writing somewhere. I don't recall that being in writing anywhere. It literally was just in the deed that the well was shared. but it was satisfactory to the lender and it did go through.
Well, and USDA specializes in rural housing. So I'm sure they see a lot more of that than, right. Yeah. Okay.
That's my only experience.
Okay.
Hey, I just want to chime in real quick.
Please.
I just bought a home with a shared well, so I'll let you know how this whole thing goes.
Yay. You should bake cookies for your new neighbor almost immediately.
Yeah, that's
Is
what
the
I was
well on your
thinking
property,
too.
Amy, or is it on the other property?
It's on my property, but yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. We'll see how it goes. So I'll let you guys know if there are any hiccups along the way. Hopefully
Great.
not.
Hopefully not.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, so let's talk about private road maintenance agreements. So again, we're talking about things that tend to be not the norm, okay? But if you are going to your listing as a listing agent and you're going to go interview for that listing and you're going down a long gravel driveway and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 houses off to the side, go ahead and ask that seller, so what's the deal with the road? A lot of times you'll see a notice that'll say in-state maintenance or private road. Those are all tip-offs to you that there may be a road maintenance agreement, either written or unwritten, in place. So you want to go ahead and get ahead of that and ask your seller, what's the deal with the road? And they go, oh, you know, Betty down the road, she'll get a load of gravel once a year and we all chip in. Well, okay, that seems super neighborly. Is that in writing? Do you guys have an agreement? Do you pay in every year only when the gravel's ordered? Do you pay at the beginning of the year? Just ask some questions. Find out what the situation is with it. And again, it comes back to lenders. None of these issues can be issues if you have a cash buyer. But until we see more cash buyers than people using mortgage products, we still have to get in front of these issues. So lenders oftentimes will require what is called a road maintenance agreement. And that is where it is literally written up and everyone has signed it, stating what the terms of the road maintenance will be. How often are they contributing? How much are they contributing? Because the lender is going to need to know that that road isn't just going to completely fall apart. All of this is about the lender protecting their asset, because this home is going to be an asset for the lender and they have to be able to resell it on the secondary market most often. So they need to make sure it fits into a tiny box of criteria so that they can sell it in the quickest way possible. So if there is not a private road maintenance agreement, occasionally one has to be drawn up. Now, if it's just 2 people, I've seen those go off very easily. Both parties are happy to sign a road maintenance agreement. But when there are 3, 4, 5 houses and they've never had one, sometimes it is difficult to get all of those neighbors to formally sign something saying, yes, I'll give $100 every year towards an extra scoop of gravel. It's hard to get people who've lived there for a long, long time to sign something when they have been living just fine for 40 years with no road maintenance agreement. Okay. So again, if you notice those things, ask questions. And then if you have more questions, call me and we'll go over road maintenance agreements. We have had to have some drawn up from time to time, and attorneys' offices can do that. It's not actually a terribly difficult process. I had a listing where Jennifer was she was representing them in their future home purchase and I was representing them on their listing. That's a whole long story for another day. And it is absolutely that episode of Andy Griffith where Don Knotts gets 3 deals going all at the same time and none of them close, except all of ours closed. So I was representing them on the listing. Their home had been built maybe 20 years ago, but it had been parceled off from a larger tract of land. And the homeowners who owned the entire parcel originally still lived on the mountain up above. Well, there was a road, a gravel road that went up and serviced both properties, but a formal road maintenance agreement had never been written up. So we actually had to do that. And we had to go get that elderly couple's signature on it prior to closing to make sure that an actual formal road maintenance agreement existed so that the buyers of my listing would be able to close on that property and meet the conditions of their loan. So let's talk about homeowners association. Oh, do you have something to add, Jennifer, please? Please.
So I just did one that had a road maintenance agreement. It wasn't a homeowners association or anything like that. It literally was just a road maintenance agreement. So I'm not sure how strict every lender is about that, because this one was a very loosey-goosey one and it went through perfectly fine. To the point where we didn't even know at closing who handled all of it. It was literally just written in the deed that there was a road maintenance and that everybody just would share expenses, but there was no, the timeline, who did scraping, who did this, who did, like, they knew nothing. They were okay with it. It's just a little country property, but I guess it's going to depend on lenders
Right.
too on that.
And a lot of times it comes down to the underwriter.
I don't have any, we
underwriter.
didn't have anything in hand to provide. It was just literally on the deed.
But
So,
because it was in the deed, it at least was
Correct.
formalized in some way.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, great. Anybody else have a question? Rita?
I would just add that if you're doing FHA and VA, almost always it has to be in writing. And I live in a neighborhood with private road maintenance. And all of our POA funds are really just specifically for road maintenance. And that is listed in the covenants and road maintenance, common area, and whatever you do to improve those things. But we don't have like a regular, like somebody donates so much money, you know, the first house and the last house in the neighborhood all donate the same amount of money yearly. And then they contract out road maintenance.
I see. And,
Well,
and that's
anyway.
in the, okay, so that's in the covenants and restrictions for deed
Yes.
restrictions for the property.
We bought probably 10 or 11 houses that were VA purchases
Mhm.
and shared wells, road maintenance. I don't actually shared wells. They frown. They don't even want to lend on a shared well. A lot of
Right.
people who are selling VA loans off.
That's right, because they are problematic. You know, one of the two properties doesn't have a well on their property.
Mhm.
Right. Thank you, Rita. Okay, let's talk about homeowners association, property owners association, and condo associations and special assessments or pending lawsuits. So because our topic today is problems arising during the transaction, I'm not going to get into what HOA, POA, and COAs are, because they are another way usage of properties can be enforced. So it can be enforced either through deed restrictions, covenants and restrictions for on the deed itself, or it can be through a property owners association, homeowners association, or condominium owners association. So that is going to be something that comes up whenever you're selling a property that has a homeowners, property owners, or condo association requirement. And sometimes it's $45 a year, but they're using that homeowners association as an instrument to control usage of and that may be something as simple as, you know, you can't park cars on the street, or it may be as simple as no livestock, or no more than 2 dogs. It may be a very simple homeowners association list of requirements, but it is important to make sure you understand if there is one or not. And what can happen sometimes, and I'm doing one now, it's out in Vinton in Bedford County, and it's a double wide, and it's in a subdivision of double wides, and they're all really cute, and they're all on like 2 acres. And I keep hearing rumblings of there being a property owners association, but I cannot find anyone who knows for sure. The seller doesn't know. She's never paid anything, and she's lived there since 1990 or something. She's never paid anything. So it could be an optional one. And that's something to be aware of. Sometimes these are optional. You can join if you want to, you don't have to. So I looked through every listing that had ever been in that subdivision, ever. And I cannot find mention of a homeowners association or property owners association in any of them. So it looks like no agent before me ever could figure it out either. However, just to cover my rear end, I've made sure I have made the buyer's agent aware and documented that through email that I'm hearing rumblings of there or rumors of there being a homeowners association, but I've looked through all the past listings and can find no record of it. I can't find any record or reference to it in any of the city or tax records. And I've asked the seller who's been there since the 90s, and she has never paid in to any homeowners association. So that is how I'm going to document to the buyer's agent that I feel like I have tried to find out and I keep hitting dead ends. And so now I'm just putting them on notice that I'm not saying there isn't one, but I'm telling them that I have struck out in trying to document it or find them any information about it. That way later, if that Murphy's Law, right? That's what I told you this one was going to be called. That buyer moves in and a month later, somebody knocks on their front door and says, hi, we need your $78 for your annual POA dues. And they decide to get mad at me and the past seller. I at least have some documentation to say, look, I tried and I could not find a person. I could not find a representative for the POA. So that is just a little bit of me covering my seller and me covering myself if I am striking out. Now, I'm not saying send that if you have not actually done some due diligence trying to find it out. Okay, so earnestly try to get to the bottom of some of these situations. Again, I'm not saying you have an obligation of discovery, but there's a fine line when they say you have to disclose as the listing agent if you knew about it or should have known about it. Okay, so as soon as I heard a rumor that there could be a property owners association, I then felt obligated to try to hunt down and find out if that was true or not. Had I never heard that rumor, I would have not probably gone down the path of discovery to try to figure that out. Okay. So one thing you're going to want to do when you are a buyer's agent and you are going to place an offer on a home that has a homeowners association, a property owners association, or a condo association, is you as the buyer's agent have an obligation for due diligence for your buyer. That's because we are a buyer beware state. So the buyer's agent really has to be a detective. And I have a condo under contract with some of my buyer clients right now. I called the last listing agent who had a condo listed in that building. I chatted them up and asked them for assistance in figuring out who is running the property owners association, the condo association. They were able to give me the property manager's company and her contact information. So as the buyer's agent, I called the property manager, got her on the phone, talked to her about the condo association packet. Now it's the seller and the listing agent's responsibility to order that condo association packet. But what I wanted to know from my buyer prior to even writing an offer was talk to me, property manager, about any special assessments coming up. Now, special assessments, and I'll give you a perfect example, the condo we're purchasing, there is an ongoing water intrusion issue in the building. They have tried to remedy it several times, and I only know this, again, from chatter, just from rumors. And because I knew about it, I was going to ask this property manager about it. She was very forthcoming with me. It's where the sidewalk and the building come together. They have tried and tried to block water intrusion from coming in. And what's happening is infiltrating into a storage unit in the garage. Well, they've tried to remedy it and they've not been able to. Now, I asked her if there was going to be a correction done. And she said, yes, we have received one quote, but it was very high. So we have another contracting company coming out at the end of this month to give us a second quote. And I tried, and y'all know how persuasive I can be. I tried to get out of her what that first estimate was, but she was tight-lipped about it. She just said it was very big. Now, what I know is that my new buyer is going to move into that property. They're going to fix that water intrusion property, the condo association is. And then they're going to assess a special assessment onto all of the condominium owners. And I eventually did find out that that first quote was $45,000. So the first quote to fix that water intrusion was $45,000. That's $45,000 that the condo association did not expect to have to spend. And that's going to have to be burdened on all of the property owners. So I'm going to ask, as part of my buyer due diligence, is do you have any special assessments coming up? Talk to me about that, please. I'd love to get that in writing, okay? So if they'll send you an email, or you send them an email saying, Joan, thanks so much for having the conversation with me via phone today. Just so that I can be sure I have it clear, you're indicating that there is water intrusion that is infiltrating a storage unit in the garage. You have had one estimate, you're expecting another estimate at the end of the month because you were not satisfied with the price of the first estimate. And this will be burdened as a special assessment onto the property owners. Now, whether she replies back to me or not, I don't care. I'm just trying to get it on paper and get it documented that that was what our phone call conversation was, okay? Now, I had another one come up. I sold a condo at the lake, maybe back in May. Worst nightmare, y'all. Super nice people. They bought over list price. They went ahead and got rid of inspections and appraisal, bought cash, had to have this property. We were competing against like 2 or 3 other offers. Obviously, I counseled them on dropping appraisal and inspection contingencies, but they were going to remodel the unit anyway, so they felt comfortable doing that. They move in, over the moon, happy with their purchase, and 2 weeks later, they get a letter in the mail from the Property Owners Association with a $2,500 special assessment. Now, I did my due diligence. We got a fresh copy of the Property Owners Association packet. We reviewed it. There was no mention of special assessment. We even reviewed the budget for next year, and there were no special projects and no special assessments slated for 2022. I don't know how I could have done it any better, but that didn't change the fact that my buyers now were new homeowners 2 weeks in and had a $2,500 special assessment that needed to be paid in the next 3 months. So obviously they were very frustrated. Obviously they wondered if the seller had known. But what we eventually found out through the property manager is that there was a special meeting called about 4 days prior to our closing. And they did have quorum, so they had enough to vote. And they voted to do some extensive deck repair and maintenance, not repair, maintenance, and then special assess everybody $2,500. Well, excuse me, it was about 4 days prior to us being provided the packet. So we were able to argue with the property manager that that should have been in the packet. If it passed and 4 days later you're providing us a Property Owners Association packet, that should have been disclosed in our Property Owners Association packet. Ultimately, we were able to get the property manager to cover the $2,500 fee because we truly did feel that that had not been correctly documented. But that obviously took some investigative work on mine and my buyer's part. The listing agent was wonderful and the seller was great, and they helped us through that process. They lended a hand. They, told us what they knew. It would have been very, very easy. And this is just a best business practice tip for you guys. It would have been very easy for that listing agent to say, not our problem. I'm not going to bother my seller with that. Well, that may have turned my buyer's eyes towards the seller and wanted to maybe pursue, if this had not worked out well, maybe pursue action against the seller. But by the listing agent and the seller deciding to be cooperative and help us and just be nice and help us, and they had no obligation to do that. We did take the property in as is condition when we closed. But by helping us and continuing to be helpful, we were able to say, okay, well, the seller truly didn't know anything. We do believe that the seller had no idea. So that worked out, but you can see what a nightmare that could be. Even when you've done your due diligence as the buyer's agent and asked specifically about special assessments. Also ask about pending lawsuits. Specifically ask that question of the property manager or the POA president, okay? Are there any lawsuits coming up? That does happen. There could be a lawsuit against the property owners association. What if a unit has had mold and the property owners association has not been addressing the water intrusion from the exterior of the building, which in this case would be the property owners association's responsibility? What if they've not been addressing it and now they've allowed a mold situation to develop, and that property owner in that unit has had to be hospitalized for mold and needs to sue the property owners association to recoup medical bills? That's how easily a property owners association could end up finding themselves in a lawsuit. And I'm telling you, that will be burdened as a special assessment onto the property owners. It has to be. Property owners associations don't make money, they collect money. So they're going to have to use whatever they have in their coffers and then come after some more from the property owners if they don't have enough to satisfy their financial obligations. So specifically as a buyer's agent, ask about those two things. Okay, that may dissuade now, in my case, what we did in the condo we're currently under contract for, where there's the water intrusion issue, we were able to come up with a price we thought might match, and we're guessing what might match what the special assessment would be. And we were able to negotiate for the seller to put that much money in escrow, to be held in escrow for 12 months, to pay whatever special assessment came up. Now, my buyer decided to be responsible for anything over that amount, or if it takes longer than 12 months for the special assessment to be assessed, my buyer would take responsibility for it. Okay, that was a creative solution to give my buyer a comfort level that they would buy this property and not be unfairly burdened with a special assessment in the first year. So call me if those types of issues arise, because we might be able to creatively solve that issue and it might not be a deal breaker for the buyer. All right, anybody have any questions about special assessments, pending lawsuits? I've got two more little items to touch on. Okay, we're just going to keep moving through it. So this is terrible, but it does happen. The death of a seller or a buyer during the closing process. And sadly, we had one of these happen in the last 6 months for one of our agents here. It was a situation where, the elderly client had been in ill health for a while. And unfortunately, some issues had come up with the lending. And this was probably 9 months ago. Some issues had come up during lending and it had delayed the closing. And unfortunately, the elderly seller passed away before the closing happened. What I want you to remember is even if there is a power of attorney in place, that goes away upon death. Okay, so even though her daughter was fully expecting to sign all of the documents for her mother, once her mother passed away, that power of attorney dissolved. Then you're transferring into executorship. Who is the executor? And the executor of the estate may be different than who had power of attorney rights when she was alive. So you have to be very careful, because you may have the wrong person signing closing documents, and that will create a title problem down the road. So when that buyer, who has done nothing wrong and has made no mistakes, goes to sell the property later, that may be, you may have allowed a title issue to begin that someone may take advantage of. What if an heir who's disgruntled comes back and says, well, my aunt signed for that and she wasn't the executor, and I think those new buyers don't own it rightfully. Okay, that is how title clouds get created. So the most important thing I want you to remember is that power of attorney is for when someone is alive, and executor is for when someone has passed away. And if the person passes away during the transaction, you really need to get some clarification on that. And if someone is perhaps in a vulnerable medical way, and you're worried, and the family is worried that that seller might not make it to closing, which again, these are very, very delicate conversations, I understand. but it's going to be important to find out if they have an executor named for after the person passes away. Okay. If you need any help figuring out how to broach that subject with them, just call me, let me know. We've certainly done it before. I hate to say that, but we have. And then on a different note, what if, and Rita, did you have something to add or something to
Oh,
ask?
no, I had a question.
Please, please.
So if someone dies, that negates a contract, right?
No, not
It does
necessarily.
not.
Not necessarily, because if there's an executor of the state, it almost certainly is going to cause a delay.
Okay.
But if there's an
What
executor,
if there is no executor?
I'm sorry.
What if it's intestate? There's no executor.
Well, it will fall to some sort of heir or some sort of chain of
You have to
distribution.
wait for probate?
Yes, it may cause a delay. And this is where that on or about closing date is going to, everyone's going to hate that. Because the buyer doesn't necessarily have a right to terminate when that happens. Now, I think in most cases, the seller and the seller's family, most of the time is fine with releasing that buyer because they got to get their stuff sorted anyway. You know, they've got to get all that worked out anyway. So just call
Let
me
me
if that does happen, but it doesn't necessarily void the contract.
If you have a very ill seller and you know that they have somebody who's a POA, would you recommend that they go ahead and just get a new deed drawn up that with, that would be, help me, Lord.
Like a right of survivorship deed?
Yes, with both of their names on it. And that way.
Yes, except then that might muddy the waters on who are the heirs and who are the beneficiaries of the estate. So that is above my
I
pay
see.
grade.
Yeah.
And I would say my part would be to ask them, hey, do you have an attorney who's prepared to help you with the estate? You know.
Okay, so if you have a buyer, for instance, then, and you're purchasing a property where somebody is very ill, would you recommend they do the purchase, and if the seller is a decedent prior to closing, that it reverts to an option to purchase?
Well,
So that
I would say that is such a rare set of circumstances that I don't know that you'd even know in advance of writing the contract. So
Okay.
I may know as the buyer's agent that the home is vacant, or that I see a lot of signs in there like walkers and things like that, that may indicate to me that this person may have gone into a nursing home facility. A lot of times you don't know if the person is moved to a nursing home or the person has died. As the buyer's agent, you really don't know. The listing agent is usually not very forthcoming with that information because they don't want to stigmatize the property as we got to sell, grandma's in a nursing home and we have got to move this house. So what I would say is, in hindsight, I think you will wish you had written in that type of language, but I don't know that you'll know in advance enough to know to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And a lot of times, the family may not even know that there's a precipitous illness that's going to end in the person passing away. Yeah. But it does happen. So certainly call us. We're happy to walk you through it. Let's talk about incarceration of a seller or buyer. We have had this one too. Had their house for sale and they had to go away for a while. So this one actually can be pretty easy. And that is that oftentimes when someone is incarcerated and it's going to be for a period of time, they will go ahead and assign someone power of attorney rights. So then you really can continue on selling the home through the power of attorney. All that would need to be provided is the power of attorney documents proving that this person has the right to sign for the seller who has now disappeared. Now, when the buyer is incarcerated, it's not going to be that easy. It could be, because they could have a power of attorney and the mortgage, I guess, could move forward. But a lot of times that's going to be a situation where it fails to move forward because everything's going to fall apart at that point. But when they're the seller and they have assigned a power of attorney, that can move forward as normal as possible. Anybody have any questions about that one? Okay. All right. I am going to wrap it up for the day. I appreciate you being here today.